Welcome to Walk Talk, the Faith in Motion podcast, where two regular guys talk about their walk with Christ. We're not pastors, we're not priests, just passionate followers of Jesus, here to give an account for the hope that lies within us. We don't shy away from the tough topics or challenging scriptures. We just share our faith, and we hope that you find it helpful. We're your hosts, Randy Dupre and PJ Verdin. Thank you for joining us today. All right, you ready to get into this, man?
Absolutely, man. Let's talk about it.
All right, so I'm thinking let's do something a little different today, if you're all right with it. So got a call the other day from our brother Brian, and in the moment, I was sitting here at my desk talking to him, and he has a lot going on that I think is worth sharing with the world. So in the moment, I decided, let me just record this call, because I think this would be good information for us to talk about, and then also just to share with all of our listeners.
Absolutely, man. That's cool. I'm interested to see, and I guess they're recording it from the other side as well. So
Absolutely.
why not? Why
Yeah.
not?
So, all right. So I recorded this call with him. So let me just say this first. In case anyone out there who's actually following our podcast don't know, me and PJ are brothers, right? And we also have two other brothers in common, at least. And one of them is actually in prison, and he's doing some great stuff in prison, though. And I had a phone call with him a couple days ago where he was sharing with me some of what he was working on. And eventually we're going to share a lot more, but I wanted to give you all a little preview because I think it's worth discussing. So I'm going to
Absolutely.
go ahead.
And just as a point of note, like, I'm very proud of him for coming to the Lord, because that's kind of where he came to the Lord at, was in his current situation. So glory to God for that.
All right. So I'm going to play this call that I had with him, and then we'll get into it. All right, man. So let's start off by just telling him, who you are, what's your name, your inmate number, all that kind of stuff. Where are you at right now?
All right. Yeah. My name is Brian Adams. Inmate number 0244-3585. Currently serving out a 12-year prison sentence in Hutchins State Jail or Hutchins Unit in Dallas, Texas. I committed a crime out of my own volition to find myself behind these walls, man. Just kind of hoping to bring awareness to the conditions and the type of environment that produces a type of person that it will eventually re-enter society, man. So
Right.
I kind of want to bring awareness to what we're going through in here to bring light to it, I guess.
And we don't have to get into like all the details right now, Brian, but let's at least just let everybody know, like, you didn't like hurt anybody. You're not in there for like doing any serious damage to any property or like hurting anybody.
Well, that actually I did. I actually was
Oh, you did?
damaged.
Okay.
Yeah, I damaged some property. Yeah,
Okay.
nobody was injured physically. Nobody had other than property damage.
Right.
So
Okay. So, but nobody was seriously hurt. You damaged some property, but it's not like you embezzled and stole millions of dollars or killed someone or seriously assaulted anybody.
no, believe it or not, I was actually defending myself and my property by, I doing what a normal person could find themselves doing to protect their property. But because I had a felony, it actually influenced the decision to send me to prison more than with somebody who didn't have a felony.
Right, because you already
So,
had a record for doing some knuckleheaded things previously.
Yeah, believe it or not, damaging property as a teenager, I caught a felony that landed me in prison in another state where I served 8 years for, again, property damage. So it was kind of more like a habitual thing. They continue to things, really, just somebody who's prone to criminal acts,
Right.
which, before my change in life, I was that guy. I fit the mold of recidivism, the type of person that they'd expect to get out of prison and commit another crime. They have statistics on this thing, man, and I fit that statistic.
Right.
I fed into the lie, and you know, something I'm still, regretting to this day, but I'm very grateful for the experience that I've come to receive from this experience.
And right now, so you said you're in Texas, right? You're in Hutchins, right? And I know previously, you told me that this place really broke you, and you've had encounters with God in the past, but this one seems different.
And completely different. So the breaking took place in the form of torture, man. Um, we don't have air conditioning in here in Texas. They say prison out here, they're without air conditioning and heaters, and so when the summers hit, man, it's hot, and when the winters hit, it's cold.
Right.
So, and recognizing that another human being can do that to another human being, and kind of just shrug it off like it's no big deal, uh, made me really question a lot of things, man, about humanity. But it also brought me closer to ask God, like, why?
Right.
And through the suffering, and through my suffering, man, I found God, man, and He really showed me just how close He was there the whole time. And through that, through those moments of isolation and having to suffer, I think back to the Apostle Paul, man, and what he had to go through in his period of time, and the amount of accomplishment that he attained through his, sitting in prison, and the joy he found in sitting in prison. They didn't have air conditioning back there, and by picturing that type of environment for the Apostle Paul, and I drew inspiration from the Bible, and
Mm,
then to see like the scriptures come to life about men in prison, about like David in Psalm 142, verse 7. He's telling God to bring him out of prison.
yeah.
Hebrews, 13:3, talking about, don't forget the prisoner,
Right.
and here I am sitting, suffering with other men, and also able to encourage them and inspire them to reach for God in these moments of I guess, their lowest moment to reach their highest potential.
Right.
And it's awesome, man. A lot of men are turning to God in this time, especially behind these walls. It's an awesome thing to witness.
Right.
But yeah, man, it broke me to build me for
Yeah.
sure.
And that's and so my company is called Forge Point, and it's all about transformation, right? And the Forge Point is a metaphor for transformation, because what a Forge Point is, it is the place in time when enough pressure and enough heat has built up to really break you down, so you could start to become transformed into something of value and of something of purpose. And it sounds like you hit that Forge Point in this facility that you're in.
Yeah, believe it or not, it happened actually at a facility, like an intake facility when I first came through. The Vito unit uh, in the Tennessee colonies in Texas out here, man. And just the environment, just watching men that have literally succumbed to their environment and become products of that, which is, unhealthy.
Right.
And I was like, I took that moment, my fork in the road moment, to decide if I was going to make this a lifetime thing or not, because they were offering me a prison sentence this time. They were offering 99 years. They saw my criminal history from my past as the catalyst to set me apart from the world forever.
Mm,
And I was given, by the grace of God, a lesser sentence, and I took advantage of it instead of using it as something I could just take for granted. I took it as an advantage and was like, this is the change that needs to take place, and how to obtain that is
yeah.
the only way I can really express it is through God, man. And I'm very grateful.
Yeah, and just so everyone could understand the magnitude, just tell everybody how old you are, and how long have you spent in prison altogether throughout your life?
In the next couple months, altogether, I've spent over 20 years institutionalized
Wow.
in one form or another. I have spent. I got locked up when I was 11 years old. And from 11 years old to 24 years old, I had yet to see a free year on the street. I would get out for a couple weeks, a couple months, and be locked up for 2 to 3 years at a time.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of those times, it's not that you were necessarily committing more crimes, but you just weren't always following the rules of your parole or, your release, correct?
Yeah, yeah, the probation and it's set up. This is where the reform needs to take place at the early stages because I had a father who went to prison, so the percentage like 87% chance of me going to prison. That's how that they got it all labeled in statistics. So
Mhm.
when they give man, they make it the rules and requirements so strenuous, and especially for a child when you have to rely on like a parent or say your parent like my our mom like was just like working constantly to support a bunch of kids that it just made it difficult for her to cut from her job to come take care of the poor businesses that I had going on.
Right.
So failing to report uh, immediately grounds for sending you back to prison, or if anything was possible, like curfew violation, or at the time I had a smoking habit at a young age. I know it was a nasty habit, but I was smoking cigarettes. They had that right there was enough to revoke my probation and send me to jail.
Yeah.
So there were so many little things that just got me stuck in the system, you know.
Well,
So yeah,
I know, and it's really sad, man. And I'm sorry that you've gone through all this, but I am definitely encouraged by your story, and I'm looking forward to reading about it. So tell everybody what you've been working on.
book it's called only a loser learns first, and it really is an accumulation of all of the information that I've acquired over the years in prison. In prison that they offer cognitive behavior therapy, which is a way of changing your thinking that brings about new patterns of thought that'll help you manage your behaviors and your feelings and potentially give you better results. Bringing it all together, you got to first find your identity in Christ, and also you have to be able to build values and principles that are maintained by keeping a set of goals. By having your goals in order, you can just become literally anything. God has given us the ability to make ourselves uh, very, very valuable to others around us in our communities. That's
Right.
what it's about, man. It's kind of just a bunch of what I've learned over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm looking forward to reading it. I know you're in the process of sending it to me, and I'll help you to get it edited and copyright, complete, and we'll get it published. And I think that, it's very possible that, hopefully you'll be released soon. And it's very possible that the timing of the publishing and your release, will coincide to where they're pretty close to each other. And then we'll have you come back on our podcast, and, we'll help you get on some other venues where you could just, share the word and share the message and let people know about your book and your story. And, I think that's going to be, a good thing to look forward to. Absolutely. Well, I appreciate, you giving everybody just a little preview, of what's to come. Anything else you want to say before, before we end?
Yeah, just with the man, Hebrews 13:3, something that we should always do, man. Remember those who are suffering as if you're suffering with them. That's it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that. Thanks for that. Appreciate that, Brian.
All right, I appreciate you.
Oof.
All right. Let's see. So, first and foremost, apologies for the tough technical difficulties. It's tough talking to anyone who's calling from jail or prison. A lot of times it's really hard to you know um, hear because there's people talking in the background, bad connections, all sorts of stuff like that. So, but I think
And
I think you probably got the gist of what he was saying for the most part, right?
yeah. Yeah, man, it's wild, you know. This is, our brother, our flesh and blood, you know. Obviously we view him a little bit differently than other people because of our ties to him and stuff like that. But yeah, man, I mean, just in general, speaking to what he was saying, like, I mean, that that's what Jesus says, right? Whatever you've done to the least of these, my brothers, you've done to me. And I mean, at the end of the day, whenever we receive Christ, we're all brothers and sisters, and which is why, he says, love your neighbors as you love yourself. You know what I mean? But nobody else above God. Is just all full circle. And so, absolutely, man, like, just having
Yeah.
that heart for Christ, and just being, just loving people, being conscious and grieved whenever you see people suffering, man. It's important.
It is important, and, I think the audio cut out on, one important piece. If you didn't hear, he's only 33 years old, and he's spent 20 years of those 33 years in youth facilities, and he's not lying. I mean, he literally
Yeah.
was 11 years old the first time he was incarcerated in a youth facility. And as we discussed, it's not that he was out committing crimes. I mean, he did commit crimes, and he takes accountability for it. But a lot of the time that he had at it, that equated to that 20 years, was just his inability, to follow rules. He wouldn't report, or he would get caught smoking, like little things like that that a person shouldn't be put in prison for. Just continue to add time to his sentence. And anyone who's been in the system knows once you're in, it's really hard to get out.
Institutionalized, you become institutionalized, and then you become a career criminal, and I mean, you stick to what you know.
Yeah, so God has used his incarceration to, reveal himself to Brian. And, I'll be honest, I've heard this for years. And, those of us who know him and love him and have been in communication with him have heard it for a long time. Where he's, found God in jail, and then he's gotten out and he's kind of walked away from God. And, I truly do believe that this time it is different, because, it sounds like he was really broken. He really did get to that point where he was broken down, and transformation was able to really start. And now he has this heart to where he just wants to, take all of his pain and suffering and put it into a book, and just hopefully help, other men, other, people in general, just, avoid some of the pain that he's had to go through, through learning the hard way. So, I'm looking forward to, helping him get his book published, and then, hopefully he'll be, released soon, within the next few months, either late this quarter or early 2Q of 2026. And, and I think he's got a really good story to tell, and a powerful message behind that story that, I hope, we're able to help him, and he's able to get the word out, and share with as many people as possible.
Absolutely, man. And the testimony that he's going to share is a testimony that a lot of people might be able to relate to, and it'll resonate with them. You know what I mean? And man, yeah, all glory to God. I think that'd be good. That'd be awesome, man. You know?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so one thing oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, no. Go ahead.
Well, one thing that I thought was worth discussing, with us here today, was something he kind of alluded to. He mentioned that he had a father that was in prison. So, for you and me, we grew up pretty much in a fatherless home. We actually lived with his dad more than we lived ever, with our own, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And his father, went to prison, early into his childhood. And I won't get into all the details behind that, but, most of, Brian's life, his dad was incarcerated. And so, he talked about that. And so I wanted to share some statistics, um, around just the importance of having a father in the home. And then let's, talk about that and what that means, for us as Christian men, and how, we need to show up as fathers. So, in the United States, and ironically, the United States actually has the highest rate in the world of children living in a single parent household, which is about 23% of, so 23% on average, children live in a single parent household, and which is far above the global average, which is 7%.
Goodness.
Um, and 80% of those single parent homes is single mothers. So it's only 20% single fathers. It's mostly single mothers. And so, this is something that hits home for us, right? Because we grew up without a father in our home. And so we may be more the exception to the rule, whereas Brian maybe proving the rule, right? But 90% of homeless and runaway children come from fatherless homes. 90%. 63% of teen suicides come from fatherless homes. 85% of children and teens with behavioral disorders come from fatherless homes. 70% of teen pregnancies occur in girls who grew up without a father present. 70%. And fatherless children are 20 times more likely to be incarcerated and 11 times more likely to exhibit violent behavior than children who came from a two-parent home.
Man, it's a lot of heavy information. And yeah, you're right. I mean, it does, it hits close to home, man. And I think that, um, man, it's just, I think one of the contributing factors is not that I believe in luck, but it's like, man, I see how easily things could have turned out different. And whenever it comes to my own personal experience, I think that the reason why I I chose to go the way that I did instead of the way that it seemed like I probably was going to go, you know what I mean, according to the statistics, was basically because I already felt like that's how I was viewed, right? So I already thought that I was basically like a throwaway, you know what I mean, that I was just discarded, not wanted. And in my mind, the sweetest revenge was not to just say, well, man, nobody expects anything out of me anyways. May as well just, go with the status quo. It was like, nah, man, the sweetest revenge, the biggest, you know, F you for lack of a better term, back then, especially that was exactly it was like, man, look at me now. I'm gonna go and make something out of myself so that it's rubbing it in your face that you didn't want no parts of me and
Yeah.
and look what I became in spite of that, so which is the
Mhm.
wrong motive, but thankfully, again, whenever looking back now, I can see the silver linings of grace of God's gentle nudging me, even whenever I wasn't aware of His presence.
This podcast is sponsored by my company, Forge Point. Do you want to make 2026 a year of growth but don't know where to start? Join a 5-week mastermind class focused on the 15 invaluable laws of growth by John Maxwell. You'll unlock your full potential as you become more intentional about growth that will impact your life, your family, and your community. We have a special group for pastors and church leaders starting soon. Just go to forgepointllc.net and use the code WALKTALK for $50 off. Again, go to forgepointllc.net and use the code WALKTALK for $50 off.
No,
Yeah,
so
100%. 100%. And I just want to say that, this is, these are stats that I'm quoting that, anyone could Google. We're not sharing this to disparage women or single mothers or anything like that. We were raised by a single
by a
mom
single mother, yeah,
who we love and did the best that she could. Um, but it's more to talk about, like in Brian's case, like I do think that, he feels it, we feel it, and we just want to share with each other, with all of you, some of this information because yeah, it hits super close to home for us, and we've lived it firsthand and secondhand through our brother Brian. And it's just so important that as we're talking about our faith and how just two regular guys, right, or just talking about our walk with Christ, that we touch on things like this. And it's just so important that not only do we follow Christ, but like we show up where it matters, with Christ in us. And I think for men, where it shows up the most is in our homes and in our families, and the way we interact with our children. And for women, knowing this information, I'm hopeful and I pray that knowing this information will help women to, make wise decisions when they're choosing the man that they want to be with. I mean, the Bible says not to be unequally yoked. And so for young women out there, and I have a young daughter that I hope is listening, you know, pay attention to this information and choose wisely, who you share your bed with, because it's going to matter. It's going to matter for your children.
absolutely. Just what I think is important, you know, I think had I been more aware of, you know, the impact that not having a dad was actually having in my life at the time, because like I just kind of like brushed it off, man. Like I deflected it, or you know what I mean. I just made excuses for it. Like you just get used to it, so I'm just like, man, whatever. I don't care, but you do, and it does affect things. Like I think that there was there could have been a lot of different outcomes to situations if I would have understood the concept of even having a heavenly father back then. You know what I mean? Somebody that I felt like I got that love and acceptance for, and was made provided a way to show me how and what being a man looked like, you know what I mean, and how to go about that. And
Yeah.
I mean that's something that I feel like I've definitely discovered later on in life, and I mean, like, I've dealt with things well into my 30s that
Mhm.
I was confused about, because it's like, man, you don't know. And yeah, we did grow up with a single mom, but it's I'm sure pretty common knowledge that women are capable of incredible things. They're very nurturing, loving, in ways that men are lacking. But
Right.
one thing that I know is that a woman can't teach a man how to be a man, or a boy how to be a man.
100%. And that's why it's so important that, children do have both parents because like you said, there is things that only a mother could provide, like that love and that
100%.
tenderness and that nurturing. But there's also things that only a father could provide, like that structure and that discipline. And as we've been learning, as we've been digging into Wild at Heart, masculinity can only be passed on by masculinity. And I love to read. And, one of the series that I really enjoyed reading, and it's been years, but I read all the Freakonomics books. And there was actually, I think it was the first book just titled Freakonomics where they got into this and they talked about some of these stats. And, it was probably slightly different. I think some of them were worse back then. Um, and one of the things they talked about, in relation to masculinity, passing on masculinity, was this situation in South Africa that happened some years ago where they had all these older, bull elephants had been hunted, and all these younger elephants, these male elephants, started going crazy. They started like hunting people, and they started like running through villages and like just terrorizing villages, and they were killing what was it, rhinos? I think they were just killing rhinos for sport. And like these elephants were going crazy, and the solution was they took these bull elephants from other parts of Africa and brought them in, and they like calmed everything down and everything went back to normal just by the presence of these bull elephants.
Males, yeah, males. Yep.
Yeah.
It's wild, man. It really is. And man, this is one of those topics that really, resonates with me, for multiple reasons. I think it's important. I think that it's, uh, yeah, in a lot of cases, grossly overlooked. You know what I mean? Society grooms us in one way. Like, man, who cares how you think or feel? Whatever. That's not your job. Go out and do it. Shut up about it. I don't want to hear a complaint. Like, just all these things, man. And it's just it's a lot. It's a lot to speak to.
So we saw that, you have a 20% or 20 times more likely to be incarcerated if you grow up without a father. As I Googled some stats, it was 60% of people incarcerated right now grew up in fatherless homes. And I also kind of looked at the flip side of this. It says that, if you have, aspirations of your children going to college, for example, only 40% of college graduates grew up in a fatherless home. So in other words, of everyone graduating, only 40% of them grew up in a fatherless home. So your chances of going to prison much, much higher. Your chances of getting an education much, much lower if you grew up in a fatherless home. So those are, interesting statistics to share. And I thought that was relevant because I know one of the things that, again, in the book Freakonomics, they quoted some stats around the success factors of children, and it has, and a lot of people think, put your children in the right schools and they'll be successful, or all these different things people think, are going to lead to success. And one of the things that they discovered was, it has more to do with the age and education of the mother at the time the child was born in terms of how successful the child ends up becoming later on in life. But that factor alone is not enough, because as soon as you take the father out of the picture, it's like everything normalizes. So when you have a father in the picture, the age and education of the mother becomes a determining factor. But without the father, there's really, very little that the mothers could do in terms of, encouraging their children to be successful, productive citizens.
Absolutely. And look, I'll be honest, man. I thank God for my wife. She's very involved, and she has a way of communicating. I mean, we have four boys. She has a way of communicating with them that is, I'm like, man, she does an awesome job, and so they're very open with sharing stuff with them, and it's crazy because because she has kind of that more, I guess you would call it maybe a closeness or whatever. There's times where she's thought like, oh, he won't want, one of our sons, he won't want to do that, like for example, like, you know we went on a vacation, and I was letting the boys shoot the gun, and she's like, oh, our youngest, she's like, oh, he probably wouldn't want to do that. And and she asked him, she's like, hey, do you want to shoot the gun? And he was like, I don't know. I was like, come on, bud, you got that. And he's like, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And look, I didn't realize what was happening until I sat back after, and I realized what I did was gave him the confidence that he didn't know that he
You need
needed.
it.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Right. And she's like, she's like, oh, I don't think, and so he's more leaning towards that. And I'm like, from a father to a son, like, yeah, bud, you got that. Daddy's here. I'm gonna watch you. I'm gonna make sure that you're safe. You're good. And he was, and he loves it. You know what I mean? He still talks about it, and the it was the craziest thing, man. And honestly, it broke my heart because, I do see a closeness with him, with his mom, and I love that. It's great. But, based off this one little interaction, later on that night, he came to me and he said, you know what, Dad, I think we should hang out more. Like, you know what I mean? Like, cause I guess
That's funny.
it really stuck to him, and I was just like, man, this is, it was like, it was just, it was a crazy thing, and it helped me understand better the gravity of like, even the simplest things of just the differences, right, in my upbringing versus their upbringing. Thank God.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, and it does, you mentioned earlier, it does kind of stay with you, whether you really acknowledge it or not, or whether like, um, really even know it or not, to be honest, like it does stay with you. And I can tell you, like, as a, as a grown man who grew up, in a single, with a single mother, it affects the way I relate to both men and women today. And it has
Absolutely.
throughout my entire life. Like I
Yeah.
definitely feel like there's a lot of things that, I can't relate to with other men, who did grow up with their fathers in their home. And sometimes when it's a group of guys that's hanging out, I kind of feel like the odd one out in a lot of ways. And sometimes I, have, more better conversations and with women, because I guess that's just, something that affected me that way.
Oh
And
yeah,
I'm not ashamed to admit it.
100%. And I'm in the same boat, man. Like, there's very many times where I felt inadequate. Like, if I have some brothers that'll start talking about mechanical stuff, and I'm like, man, I have no idea. My dad never showed me how to work on a car. My dad never showed up. You know what I mean? And so there's a lot of times where it's just like it's embarrassing, and I don't want that for my kids. And what bothers me is this: because I don't have that kind of stuff that was passed down to me, I'm like, man, I don't want to do them a disservice. So, I mean, there are things that I've learned how to do just for the simple purpose of showing it to them. Or if there is one of those same brothers that is talking about stuff, like I'll be like, hey, man, go, like, let's go check them out and see what he's doing, because I'm like, if I can't teach it, that doesn't mean that I don't think that it's important for them to learn, from somebody who does know. And so, yeah, I try to make that a practice, man. And I try to, you know, I try not to myself be so, because what used to happen in those situations, like you said, well, I can relate better to women. Like, I, I've come to this place where I'm like, man, I'll let those guys know. Like, listen, man, I'll be honest with you. I don't know anything about that, you know what I mean? And I used to be ashamed to say that, but I'll let them know, like, man, I don't know nothing about it. And sometimes, I'll find myself learning things from them, and I think that that's cool, also. You know what I mean?
I agree. I agree. And so I did want to share a few verses that just talk about, you know, fathers in the Bible so that way, we could, kind of just, have some encouragement here. So I got a couple of them. If any of these jump out at you, I would say let's look at that neat Bible you got when and look at some of the what the concordance says because I think there might be some good ones here, but I'll kind of just go through a list of them and then if there's any that jump out, let's take a deeper look. But in Deuteronomy 6, it says, Fathers are commanded to teach God's ways diligently to their children every day. In Psalms 127, it says, Children are a heritage and a reward
Amen.
from the Lord, not a burden.
Right, right.
Um, Proverbs 22, it says, A father's guidance shapes the long term direction of a child's life. Ephesians 6, it says, Fathers are called to lead without provoking, disciplining with instruction that's rooted in the Lord. Colossians 3, it says, it's a warning for fathers not to discourage or crush their child's spirit.
Oh,
Um, Joshua 24, one of your favorite verses, a father's declaration that his household is going to,
as for
it,
me and my house, we will
yeah,
serve the
his
Lord.
household, his leadership, his
100%.
conviction, and for his house. Malachi 4 talks about turning the hearts of fathers to their children. Proverbs 20 talks about blessings and stability that a father leaves for their children. And in First Corinthians, Paul distinguishes between instructors and true spiritual fathers. Any of those jump out at you that you want to dig into a little bit? That's a few. I know there's many more good verses that, talk about the role of fathers, but those were a few that jumped out at me.
Yeah, man. You know, and you already heard about how I feel about Joshua, my guy Joshua. But I think that it is important to notate that, like, with Joshua, whenever he was up there, addressing the nation, like, if he wasn't a man of action, right? Like, so if he was different at home with his wife and his kids and he was, in front of these people having these kind of conversations, I don't think that his words would have carried the same weight. They would have been able to tell how his wife and his kids responded. You know what I mean? Like, if 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 they were like, they see Joshua up there addressing them, saying, "Oh, well, y'all need to do X, Y, and Z," and the wife is in the background, like, "Pfft, he don't do that at the house. I
Right.
don't know what he's
Right.
talking about," or you know
Right.
what I mean, or his children, he wasn't, you know, having them, like it says, rooted in the Lord, and raising them correctly. They'd have been like, "Oh, Dad, you don't know what you're," but it wasn't, man. Like, it was, his family was a solid unit, and I think that the people saw that. So whenever he said, "As for me and my house, we're gonna serve the Lord," they're like, "Man, this is a pretty solid example.
Yep.
Us too. We're gonna do that too." You know what I mean?
100%. And that's a great example for us as Christian men to aspire to and to follow, right? And I do believe that it is good to have those examples. I mean, Paul himself said, "Follow me as I follow Christ," right? Imitate me as I
Amen.
imitate Christ. And I think that's that's good to have those kind of heroes. I mean, I'll be honest and just say that, I know that I've messed up a lot in, being a father and a husband, and I've made a lot of, terrible mistakes. And, one thing that I wanted to get right, and I'll share a little bit about it. And, I thank you for being part of it is, the rite of passages that I did for, both of my boys. And I would love to see more of that kind of stuff happen. And so, I'll just share a little story. So, for everyone could, kind of know what I'm talking about. When I was a few years ago, when my older son, was about to turn 15, he was 14. I don't know. God just put something on my heart. I don't know what it was. It was probably a sermon or, something else that I was listening to that, it was talking about this very topic. And I just started thinking like, we should do some sort of something. We're not raising boys, we're raising men. We should do something to signify that. And I started doing a little research and looking into what could we do? What type of rite of passage ceremonies are people doing these days, right? And I reached out to a couple pastors I knew, and I asked them because I knew they had boys that were a little bit older than my boys, and I asked them. I said, "Hey, pastor, what did you do when your son turned of age?" I didn't even give a specific age. Did you do anything like a rite of passage ceremony? And I didn't get any really good answers. I mean, one pastor told me he went on a hike with his son in Colorado, and, when they got to the top of the mountain, he just kinda talked to him a little bit about manhood kinda being like that hike, and I thought that was pretty cool, and another one, told me, like, they didn't really do anything at all. Another guy I talked to said, he took his son's hunting, and he, had him, kill his first animal, and that was kind of the thing that they did. And then I talked to another guy who said that, he kinda did like a Bible study with them, which was really cool. But then as I was doing research, actually found this author who wrote a book called, what was it called? Milestones to Manhood. I forget the author, but I read the book. I consumed it very quickly. It was a relatively short book, and essentially, this was a father who wrote the son with his book about a rite of passage ceremony that he put together for his son, and I modeled one very similar to what he did. I modeled one for my son very similar, and just to share everyone what it essentially entailed a group of Christian men, Pete included, PJ included, who came, and we basically spent the weekend together. And, we had Bible studies, we, did various activities. But it culminated with a ceremony where essentially we all had wrote letters ahead of time to him, and we read those letters to him about basically from our perspective what it meant to be a man. And there were 7 elements to this. I won't get into all 7 elements. I mean, I'm interested to hear your take on what you remember of it and how it went, because you were part of the first one for Ethan. But yeah, I mean, it was important to me that a group of men got together and said, "Hey, first of all, here's what it means to be a man and a Christian man. And second, by the way,
Absolutely.
all these men now see you as a man. You don't have to go and seek validation from the world. We see you as a man."
Right. And I think that's the nail on the head is a Christian man, right? Because, you know, I'm sure that there are certain things that people would consider rites of passages in the complete wrong way. You know what I mean? As far as what qualifies you, like where's the the exchange from boyhood to becoming a man, and it's pretty bad. So, but yeah, man, no, no, it was great. It was a great experience. I remember, some of the things, like one of the first things that I remember was giving him some responsibility, and letting him make decisions, and then also like encouraging him, like, hey, look, just so you are in charge of this, and we will listen to you, but here's some things to consider, just to understand the gravity of, like, man, being in charge is, you don't just get to do what you want. You have to think about the consequences of your decisions and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And then, you know, um, just kind of, I think just, I remember a lot of bonding in general. Like, I know he was in charge of not just like sleeping arrangements, but what we ate and what we did, and things like that. And then, I
Yep.
mean, realistically, the biggest thing that I thought was awesome was kind of, getting to share, and kind of pour into someone, at that age, and just say, look, man, I know this is a lot, but you're getting multiple perspectives here that all kind of have the same central theme, which is, like, man, God will solve a lot of this,
Yep.
for you. So
Yep.
make sure that's the focal point.
This podcast is sponsored by my company, Forge Point. Do you want to make 2026 a year of growth but don't know where to start? Join a 5-week mastermind class focused on the 15 invaluable laws of growth by John Maxwell. You'll unlock your full potential as you become more intentional about growth that will impact your life, your family, and your community. We have a special group for pastors and church leaders starting soon. Just go to forgepointllc.net and use the code WALKTALK for $50 off. Again, go to forgepointllc.net and use the code WALKTALK for $50 off.
Yeah, so just backing up a little bit, I almost didn't say a Christian man because in my opinion, that should be the default. Like if you're not living, if you're not right with Christ, if Christ is not in you, you're not a man, in my opinion,
Yeah.
regardless of what you might be,
No.
doing in the world's eyes. Like, to me, man was created for a purpose. And if you're not living that purpose, then you're not truly. So I won't get into that too much, but,
I thought we was
um,
gonna have one where we didn't say nothing that people were like, "What did he just say?"
well,
Uh,
but I will say that it was a powerful experience. God really showed up there, and it was just as powerful. Maybe even more so for the other men involved. So two of Ethan's uncles on his mom's side were there, and you were there. And we had another friend that was there, and one of his uncles even said, like, we were fishing, like we went fishing, none of us caught anything. I think you were the only one who caught anything, if I remember.
Louisiana in the
Yeah,
house.
master fisherman over here is showing us all up. No one catches anything except for Pete. But one of his uncles, his twin uncles, and their dad died when they were 10 years old. And in stats on boys who grew up in households where their father died is tremendously different than fathers who are not present, by the way. So if you look at the stats, it's like it's not even close. Like, there's still a lot of challenges, don't get me wrong, but it's different when the father is absent through
By
something like
choice.
by death versus by choice.
Right, right, right.
And one of his uncles said he had never been fishing before.
No, like,
He never.
it was a big moment for him. He was like,
Right.
I'd never been taken fishing before, and now essentially you're being taken by your nephew, you know what I mean? Which is kind of a
Which again,
cool
it's
thing.
like it was just as impactful for him as it was for my son, whose rite of passage it was, right? And so it's like, it was there to me. I felt like there was a lot of healing, and there was just like, a lot of God showing up to help strengthen men. And so I just share that story just to say that, like, fatherhood is very important, and we're not just saying that as two guys. Mothers are super important too. Don't get me wrong, but in terms of, like, a boy, you they need their father, and fathers need to show up not just physically, but they need to show up spiritually, emotionally,
Yep,
mentally.
yep.
And I would encourage, any father out there who's listening to do some sort of rite of passage. You don't have to do what we did. What I did was probably a little too, I don't know, might be too,
The kids
maybe
call that extra.
it might be too much for some people, but do something. Like, the important things that you need to do and it doesn't even need to be the same age. They could be 13, they could be 16. I picked 15 because that's when God put it on my heart. But the important things they need to know from you, if you are a father, is that they need to know what it means to be a godly man, and they need to know that they are a man in the eyes of other men, and they don't need to go seek that validation from
And
anyone
especially their
else.
father. I think it's just, it could be a a situation where you and that's kind of how it was for my boys. Like, we did go hunting, and I said, look, I'm trusting you with a weapon that can take life, and that we're here to harvest some meat to provide for our family, which is important. You're putting the meat on the table, right? And I'm only giving you this because I feel like you've showed enough responsibility to be able to handle the gravity of this situation. And even though only one of my sons ended up shooting a deer, I had conversations sitting there in the stand, in the middle of God's creation with both of them, and we engaged in these conversations where I let them know, like, listen, I know there's a lot of things changing in your life right now, and I'm always here and I'm always available to talk about those things. And I know you might feel uncomfortable, but just know that no matter what it is, I'm here. But I said another thing that I want you to understand is I'm watching you go from being a boy to being a man, becoming a
Mm,
young man, and that's how I
mm,
see you, and that's how I
that's
want to make
good.
sure that you see yourself that way
That's
also.
good.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so it was just kind of, it wasn't, but and don't get me wrong, I think that there's more that I would still like to do, and
Mhm.
it might change with my younger sons, but I was just I think that it was an important thing for them to both hear from my mouth directly, looking them in the face and saying, "Hey, look, the change that I'm seeing is the transition from you going from a boy to a young man," and and it was awesome, man. We had great conversations in that, you know.
That's awesome
So
to hear, man. And I think that, the important thing is we've already hit on it. It's, they need to hear it from you as their father. They need to hear it from other men, and it needs to be an ongoing conversation, right? Like, you
absolutely.
can't expect to do one event and, like, one thing, and it just be the final solution for, now we solved the problem. He's going to be a great man. It's like, no,
Right.
we need to do something big. Like, I really do believe that, like, it's about quality time and quantity time. Like, we need to have a quality conversation and a quality moment where we make a big hoopla about them
Yeah,
at some point and
absolutely.
say this is the transition point. But then also it has to be ongoing, right? It's similar to what we were talking about sanctification, right? Like, there's that point in your life where you do need to be sanctified, but then there's that ongoing maturity. And like, likewise with our sons, like, we need to have that point where they know, like, hey, here was my goal. Honestly, my goal was, like, at some point in my son's life, they may have the question, am I a man? Or someone may ask them, are you a man? Or someone may question their manhood and say, you're not a man. And I want them to say, yes, I am. I remember
Yeah.
on this date, my
Yeah.
dad and a bunch of guys got together and they told me I was a man. So what are you talking about? And likewise, with you and your sons, they can point back and say, what are you talking about? I put food on the table. My dad trusted me with a weapon that could take lives. And he told me right then and there that this is the responsibility of a man, and he wouldn't give it to me if I wasn't one. So
100%.
there will be no question in their minds. If anyone tries to say, well, you haven't been with any women, you're not a man, or you haven't, like, earned enough money, you're not a man, or you are too
100%.
scared to do this, or you don't drink that, or whatever it is, how the world is. They
Well,
won't
and
question it.
man, 100%. And let me tell you how easy this is to get confused, man. So as we stated earlier, like, man, I didn't grow up with my dad, and because of that, I was always a very insecure person. You know what I mean? Like, I very much wore a mask, and I was very much looking for acceptance and love and inclusion. Which is why a lot of the stuff that I've previously talked about was so easy, why it happened. Um, and then here's the crazy thing, right? So whenever I moved back to Louisiana and I was around people who were around my dad, what they did was, because they knew him and his character, they expected that same stuff out of me, like if I would have grown up with that, but I had no
Mm,
idea. So let me just tell
yeah,
you how that showed up.
yeah.
They would say, "Oh, I bet you're cocky and confident because your dad was always cocky and confident." I'm insecure as all get out. You know what I mean? I could have gave you a laundry list of stuff that I did not like about myself. That's just the way I was. But I'm like, man, well, they know my dad. Maybe if I act like they're what they're telling me about my dad, then maybe there will, like, am I getting closer? And so guess what? I would do these things out of what I feel like was their expectation of me. And that had me do a bunch of stuff that I would have never chosen to do on my own. But I was searching for a closeness and then with my dad that I never received directly from him. And just to be clear, there's no ill feelings. I had, there's nothing but forgiveness in my heart for my dad, and
Right.
what we reconciled that situation, and I gave that to God. But yeah, man, it was a crazy thing, and on that note, I think that's why, and this is just a brag on God, really. One of the coolest things that I can look back now and see, especially with you being a father and a husband, and you having had been present in your children's lives their whole life, and me similarly, like, man, we were able to break that chain. You know what I mean? Like, our kids are less likely to end up like our brothers or other people in our family, because
Hmm.
we decided, like, you know what, it sucked bad enough for us not having our dads around. Like, no matter what it takes, I'm gonna be there. You know what I
Yep.
mean? If for no other reason, but just to not have them deal with all the crap that I've realized as a result of just
And
uh, you
and
know
and by the way, that doesn't take away from anyone else who was in our life, right? Like, for our mom that was in our lives, our aunts and uncles, grandparents, like, it's just not the same. It's just not
right,
the
it's not
same.
the
Like,
same. No, absolutely.
and I thank God for everyone who was involved in our life, as we were growing up. But yeah, it's just not the same. There is a gap, that a person has, when they grow up in
Yep.
that environment.
Yep. Yeah. I mean,
Eh,
yeah.
eh,
I mean, go ahead.
no, no, you go ahead.
No, no. I was just going to touch on another point. For for dads out there who are present and are you know sharing the Lord with their kids. Another thing that I think is like overlooked is, if the child does happen to grow up and you've done everything you could, like I showed them how to be a man, and I gave them a good example. You know what I mean? Taught them about the Lord, and then they kind of wild out a little bit at a certain age. They go astray. They're prodigal, right? I think that one of my favorite verses for that is Proverbs 22:6. Because it basically says, train up the child in the way he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it. And I think that there's a lot of trueness in that, in the fact that it's like, man, you can go and be prodigal, but like you and I were having a conversation. You start off the son, you stay the son, and even though you go and do what you're gonna do, there's still that foundation. So whenever you come back, you're like, man, like, I kind of see it, and it's a full circle, man.
And
Um,
and
and,
yeah, there's gonna be times where even you do everything right, and your kids are gonna have to go and learn things the hard way, or they're gonna walk away from the Lord, or at least appear to walk away from the Lord. And I think that, like we talked about previously, like God's word will never come back void, and all those
man,
seeds that you planted in them throughout their life, you might have just been the one to plant it. It might take someone else to do the watering, and only the Holy Spirit can make it grow. So, just keep it in prayer, and God will do his thing. Just keep them in
absolutely.
prayer. If you're in that situation right now where you raise kids, especially boys, but if you raise children and you did your best, to teach them the ways of the Lord, and they've walked away, just keep them in prayer. And we pray for you as well, because
Yeah.
no telling what the Lord's going to do.
And the crazy thing is, man, I've heard. I didn't even realize this was a thing. Because my kids are still younger and living in the house and whatnot. But man, like, from what I understand, there's like support groups for parents who find themselves in these situations because they are just beating themselves up. And it's like, man, we got to give ourselves grace sometimes too, right? And I mean, you look at the example. Jesus had Judas walking around, and he's teaching him face to face stuff. And
Mm.
Judas just didn't get it. And not to say that your child is Judas, but I'm just saying, like, what the point I'm making is just because all the sound teaching and examples and all that is there, doesn't necessarily mean that there's any more or less that you could have done. You know what I mean? It's not. You can't beat yourself up and fault you for the decisions of other people, because God Himself, although He loves us perfectly, He granted us free grace to make our own decisions, and we have to do the same sometimes.
Well, that's something we could agree on, brother. And I just want to say, to the fathers out there who, are, you know, present in their children's life, thank you. Thank you for being there. Whether your children are grown, whether they're grown or they're still young and you're still going through it, it ain't easy. We know firsthand it is not easy. We're living it too. And it's tough, and it's easy to walk away. It's easy to bail. Um, but I hope that you understand just how important you are. And if no one else has told you, thank you.
Absolutely, and fin run the race, finish the race,
Finish
and
the
look, we
race.
we we haven't really done any, like, plugs or shout outs, but I will just say this, um, you know, whenever whenever I found myself struggling with a lot of this, especially whenever I first, you know, came to, like, Christ and started really having a lot of this kind of stuff stirred up in my heart, man, I came across, Pastor Mark Driscoll, out of Arizona, and he has a pretty in depth and man, just powerful men's ministry that, I mean, you can get online, and you know, y'all can look him up, but there's a lot of stuff there, and he's very, very, very detailed about digging in scripture and showing examples of what it means to be a man, and not just a man, but a man of God, and how you can go about doing that. And man, he just got a lot of stuff, helpful stuff on there. So I would encourage people to check it out for sure.
Yeah, we kind of have plugged John Eldridge a couple times,
Oh
but
yeah, that, yeah.
not
Now that I think
not
about it,
super
yeah,
directly. He's another good one, and yeah, I think Mark is also a really good pastor to listen to. He's very passionate about this topic as well. So
absolutely,
definitely, for men especially, we need to keep learning, we need to keep growing. Growth doesn't happen accidentally. We have to be intentional about it. And, as we started this by, listening to the phone call between, myself and our brother Brian, who's in prison. I mean, you see firsthand the impact, and, I'm very encouraged by his story, and, looking forward to seeing what God's going to do when he gets out of prison with his book and the ministry that God's put on his heart. Because the other thing I didn't talk about is, he's kind of writing this book, to his younger self to help out other men, but also as like a key to open doors, because he wants to
absolutely.
go right back into prison. This kid, he wants to spend his entire life in prison, but he wants to spend the second half of his life, or I should say the rest of his life, going in voluntarily to talk to other men in his position and encourage them. So,
Amen.
I'm really looking forward to, what God's going to do through him and through the book that he's writing and through the ministry that he's put on his heart. So more to come on that topic.
Yeah, that's awesome. What's that saying? If it's not good, then he's not done. You know what I mean? And yeah, Brian is working on getting that good part right. So that's awesome, man.
100%.
I'm excited to hear that, man. I'm happy for him and I'm proud of him. Man, God's awesome. God, you know, it's good to see him working in the lives of the people that we love, man. It's awesome. It's good stuff.
100%. All right, brother. Well, hey, I don't know about you, but I think that pretty much does it for this episode of the Walk Talk.
Hmm.
So thank you all so much for listening. And if you haven't already, please follow the show. And before you go, leave your favorite verse in the
In the
comments below.
comments below.
God
God
bless.
bless.
This podcast is sponsored by my company, ForgePoint. Do you want to make 2026 a year of growth but don't know where to start? Join a 5-week mastermind class focused on the 15 invaluable laws of growth by John Maxwell. You'll unlock your full potential as you become more intentional about growth that will impact your life, your family, and your community. We have a special group for pastors and church leaders starting soon. Just go to forgepointllc.net and use the code WALKTALK for $50 off. Again, go to forgepointllc.net and use the code WALKTALK for $50 off.